Hello, so welcome to the first of 5 videos when we're going to be looking at fiscal and monetary policy. It's really important you get the hang of them, and you may actually need or want to watch these videos several times. Okay, well, if you remember last time we met in class, we looked at the market effects and we looked at aggregate supply and demand. We looked at the market effects on the supply of and demand for money and its effect on interest rates. And if you remember, interest is simply the price you pay for access to money and you get credit. We've looked at inflation, how and why prices might increase over time, and we've looked at that and we've thought about aggregate demand and how it affects supply and demand. And we've looked at employment and the ways it can be caused, and we've thought about supply and demand of labour and unemployment. This week we're going to look at government intervention into the economy and how and why they might intervene, and we're going to be looking at 2 sets of ways they can attempt to steer the economy. First of all, it's really important to go back to this concept of the circular flow of income. We spent a lot of time on it in classes, and it's really important you do get your head around it. So it works on the principles that we have firms, and the firms go to the households. They purchase labour for wages, the fact of payments. And that's a really important concept to remember. So the firms go to the households and they purchase labour for wages, the fact of payments, and then equally the households, that's you and me, we then spend this money back on domestically produced goods and services. So that money goes back to the firms, and then the firms need to produce more goods, so they come to the households for labour, and it goes round and round. And if you remember, we've been discussing the way money is withdrawn from this circular flow of income, and we think that some people may actually save money, and if you remember, it's net saving, because some people save and some people borrow, and it's the difference which actually leaves this circular flow, the net saving. Then we looked about the taxes. The money's going to the government, and we said it was the net taxes. So it's the tax taken out of people's wages less the benefits like unemployment benefit, job seekers, universal credit, which go to people. It's the difference which leaves the net taxes. And then we thought about money going abroad, the import expenditure. And again, it's the net import expenditure, because if you buy something Italian from, say, Tesco's, some of that money will remain in this country, but some will go to Italy. So they were different ways how money is withdrawn from the circular flow, and we've discussed how money is injected back into the circular flow. And we thought about the banks making investments into businesses, the businesses borrowing money from the banks. We've been talking about the government expenditure, so what government might spend on building perhaps hospitals or schools. And then we thought about money coming in from abroad, the export expenditure, the money people from different countries buy which comes from Great Britain. And these are the injections. And if the injections are greater than the withdrawals, then we have a growing economy and a growing GDP. It rises. But if the injections are less than the withdrawals, then we end up with this concept of a shrinking economy and a shrinking GDP. So we use these ideas to actually see how government intervention can lead to economic growth and economic stability. So if we think about government intervention, so government intervene generally to correct market failure and to create public goods. And governments frequently choose to intervene in the economy to achieve economic or political goals. And we often see political parties agreeing on the targets, as we've been discussing, but not agreeing on the ways of how you get there. And this mechanism affects the operation of a market, such as those we've looked at before. And we're going to look at 2 methods of intervention and how they may affect our businesses. And it's really important that you understand the differences between them. And this is fiscal policy and monetary policy. Fiscal policy and monetary policy, both ways of intervening in the market and both different. What do they have in common? Well, they're two very different ways of trying to deal with the economy, and they can control it in two ways. So fiscal policy and monetary policy, they share the ambition to control the aggregate demand curve. It can expand. Expansionary policies seek to shift this curve rightwards, causing an increase in GDP. So to expand, to increase the demand, to drive growth and get the GDP up. And it's described as expansionary policy. And there's also to control. Contractionary policies seek to shift this curve leftwards, causing a fall in GDP. So it's very much a control to it's a control to control or slow or reduce the growth, and is referred to as contractionary policies. If we look here, I've got an example here of an expansionary policy. Now you can see the aggregate demand shifts to the right, and there's no change to the aggregate supply, the AS. It's an expansionary policy. Expansionary policy have two effects. They increase the GDP from Q0 to Q1. They increase the prices from P0 to P1. And the contractionary policies act in reverse. So if we just go back to the last slide, and we can see the expansionary policy, we're looking at the intersection of the supply and demand shifting. We can see the increase in quantity of output and the average price. With a contractionary curve, the curve would shift to the left, and the GDP falls and prices rise. And policies can be put to actually try and control inflation, as we've been discussing in our last session. So in the next video we'll start looking at fiscal policy.